Hi everyone! Today I'll show you how I work in mixed media using ink and markers and share some tips and tricks for combining these materials. For this example, I'm using one of my Inktober 2025 drawings. The prompt that day was sweep, and I thought it would be a great chance to experiment with movement drawing, long, flowing hair and a bit of outer space. I'm using this Indian ink. Today I bought a small 20 ml bottle just to test it out and see if I like working with it. And here are my markers, the ones I use for most of my drawings. I have a classic Faber-Castell set and another brand called Blackliner. Funny enough, after some time I realized I actually prefer the Blackliner markers even more. The first step in my illustration process is always making a quick pencil sketch to position the main elements on the page. I don't add too much detail, the ink will cover it anyway, and most of the lines won't be visible in the final piece. Once the preliminary sketch is done, I move on to inking. I start by brushing the paper with clean water to slightly moisten it. This helps the ink spread smoothly and create soft gradients. It also adds more depth and texture to the illustration compared to applying ink on dry paper. After that, I use a regular brush to spread the ink over the desired area. I try to keep some variation in how much ink I apply, creating a mix of light and dark sections. This uneven texture, with both transparent and dense areas, makes the illustration look more dynamic and interesting. For me, this is one of the most enjoyable parts of working in mixed media, watching how a drop of ink spreads across the wet paper. Each time, the result is completely unpredictable, and I love seeing the unique patterns that appear. It's such a calm, almost meditative moment in the creative process. In the areas where the ink has already dried, you can see it fading from deep black to a soft gray tone. If you want a darker result, you can simply add a second layer to build up the color. I've also noticed that the ink I'm using isn't completely jet black. There are likely other brands that offer a richer, more saturated shade. Once the entire surface of the illustration is completely dry, I move on to the markers. I start by outlining all the contours. Since the ink tends to spread slightly, the lines often come out uneven. To fix that, I trace over them with a 0.4 mm marker, which is thick enough to smooth and clean up the edges in a single stroke. I'm not sure if it's visible in the video, but the marker doesn't glide very smoothly over the surface because the paper warped slightly after drying. I usually try to flatten the sheet while it dries by placing something heavy on top, which helps prevent it from becoming too wavy. Next, I start working on the inner contours of the drawing. For this step, I switch to thinner markers, usually 0.3 or 0.2 mm, depending on the paper texture and the level of detail I need. In this illustration, I wanted to focus on capturing the texture of hair and the sense of movement. That's why there's so much hair in the composition. It gave me plenty of space to practice. I still find it challenging to make individual strands look natural and fluid. My goal is to reach a point where I can express motion and volume with just a few confident strokes without it feeling like a struggle. I'm not quite there yet, but I hope it will become more intuitive over time. And now comes the most interesting and at the same time the most challenging part: drawing the actual hair texture. It's turning out a bit differently than I expected. When you look closely, you can see how the marker reacts to this type of paper. The lines come out uneven, with inconsistent thickness, even though I'm applying the same pressure. They sometimes appear slightly jagged or drift off from where I intended. These are the quirks of working on thick, porous paper. It's also clear that my technique still needs improvement. The hair doesn't quite look like hair yet. I haven't fully figured out the shading approach that would make it instantly recognizable as long, smooth and shiny. Here, I'm experimenting with a combination of long and short strokes to suggest the flow and volume of the hair strands. From a distance it looks a bit better, but the unevenness is still noticeable, and that's something that really bothers me about my drawings. Here I'm switching to a white pen to draw the very thin strands of hair. There was no point in leaving the paper white for them when I was doing the ink wash. Such thin details are easier to draw over with a white pen or marker. The main thing is to choose one with good white ink opacity. The existence of these pens was a revelation to me at some point. I honestly didn't know before that such great tools existed. After finishing the hair, I move on to the final stage, drawing the starry sky. For this, white pens are truly a lifesaver. I used GellyRoll pens in 3 sizes: 0.5, 0.8 and 1 mm. With them, adding stars becomes fast and effortless. I still remember when I first started drawing and tried to create starry skies using only black markers. It took forever and the result never looked quite right. Now, with these pens, I can fill the entire night sky with stars in just a minute. And now for the final step, removing the masking tape. I use it to keep the edges of the illustration clean while working with watercolor or ink. It's a really convenient tool and I love the neat, framed look it gives the finished piece. The only downside is that sometimes the tape sticks a bit too well and it can be tricky to peel off without tearing the paper. I take one last look at the nearly finished piece and add a few small touches wherever they are needed. And that's it, the illustration is complete. I really hope you enjoyed watching this process and maybe even found something inspiring for your own drawings.